Pei. And we can see that Beit fits perfectly inside of the letter Pei. Inside of the letter Pei. Pei is a letter that means voice, but it also means mouth. It can mean word. Beit means house. So what we have here is the word over the house. Okay? The word over the house. Now, we have in the middle here, we have the word resh, which it can mean beginning, but the Proto-Hebrew pictograph of resh is the picture of a man's head. What resh actually means is someone who has authority. It means authority. So we say the word over the house has the authority. And then we come to the smallest letter of the Aleph Beit. The smallest letter of the Aleph Beit is Yod. No other letter can be created without the Yod. But the Yod in and of itself isn't made up of other letters. In other words, all the letters of the Aleph Beit, with the exception of the Yod, are made up of other letters. And we say that when the pen touches the paper, the Yod is created. We form, in this case, we form a Vav, and then when the pen leaves the paper, the Yod is completed. So it's the first and the last mark that comprises everything in the middle. So from Yod, we have a picture of Emet, that is the first and the last that comprises everything in the middle. Emet is the Hebrew word for truth. So in Yod, we have the idea of truth, specifically the truth of Yahweh. It's the letter that begins the name, but also that it creates all the other letters. We see that it is also the power and the ability of Elohim to create. So in the Yod, it represents the truth, power, and the ability of Yahweh Elohim. So we go back to Bereshit. We have the word over the house has the authority by the truth, power, and the ability of Yahweh Elohim to do something. And then we come to finally the Tav, which is the last letter of the Aleph Beit. Tav means or represents both the vehicle of sacrifice, but also the marker of the covenant. Okay? So what do we see in Bereshit? That the word over the house has the authority by the truth, power, and the ability of Yahweh Elohim to become the vehicle of sacrifice, to do something with the covenant, to establish the covenant, restore the covenant, renew the covenant. Something is going to happen with the covenant. Everybody with me? Yes. So we say the word over the house has authority. We consider John 1:1 that says, "In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with Elohim, and the Word was Elohim." Because we can take Bereshit 1:1 and lay the first chapter of John over it, and we'll understand. So John says, "In the beginning was the Word. The Word was with Elohim. The Word was Elohim." Okay? This verse doesn't mean that the Word was literally Elohim. We confuse this to say, oh, Jesus is God. It's telling us something very, very important and something very, very specific. That rather than that the Word has the authority to both judge and rule according to Elohim and to grant redemption, restoration, and deliverance, as well as to bring rest. Everybody with me? The Word has the authority to judge and to rule, and has the authority to grant rest, bring restoration, bring redemption, and bring deliverance. Okay? So this is the power of Elohim in his word. So we can understand that the word over the house has the authority, but we also consider that the word over the house was given the authority by and through the Yod, which is the truth, power, and the ability of Yahweh Elohim, and became the Tav, the vehicle of sacrifice, in order to establish, restore, and renew a covenant. So we see this in the very first word of Torah, that a means of restoration has been set in place. In the second verse of Bereshit, we see that the world is empty and void. But we see that before the world became empty and void, Elohim already had a means of restoration set in place to reverse that. There's the helical effect, that there's a transgression that's going to take place. Elohim has a means to come out of it already set in motion. Okay? Why was this done? So if we consider the helical motion of time, it will take us to a group of settings that happen both inside and outside the Garden of Eden. And this opens a can of worms with a lot of people, and it's something that we really need to think about before we say, nah, that can't be. It's something we really need to seriously take into consideration. Don't trust me. Look at it for yourself, okay? Bereshit 1:27 through 29 says, "And Elohim created man in his own image. In the image of Elohim created he him. Male and female created he them. And Elohim blessed them, and Elohim said unto them, Be fruitful and multiply, replenish the earth and subdue it, and have dominion over the fish of the sea and over the fowl of the air, and over every living thing that creeps upon the earth." Every living thing that creeps upon the earth. There's something to consider. I didn't go into it, but there's something to consider, everything that creeps upon the earth. And if we'll consider pets, that might give you a clue as to what to think about that if you have time to go over the study again. It says, "And Elohim said, Behold, I have given you every herb yielding seed which is upon the face of all the earth, and every tree in which is the fruit of a tree yielding seed, to you it shall be for food." He's given them the herb yielding seed which is upon the face of all the earth. Okay? All the earth. And that should, keep that in mind, because this should give us an inkling as to what we're going to talk about within this can of worms that we open. So thus far we see the creation of humankind and the initial instructions given by Elohim that they be fruitful and multiply, and they take responsibility over the realm of humankind, which is the earth. They are also told at this point that the produce of the earth is to be for food for them. Essentially, the word of Elohim to humankind is, "I have blessed you, take care of the responsibilities that I have given you." And that's basically what he's telling them. Eat everything, have dominion over your surroundings, take care of what I've given you. Okay? Humankind, however, was without a leadership that could provide instruction as to how to do so. Humankind was in a state of perfect innocence. According to Elohim, it was very good. And this is Bereshit 1:31, that he saw everything that he created up to the sixth day, and he said it was very good. Not just it was good, it was very good. But humankind would need to know good from evil, right from wrong. Now, it is debated as to whether this was outside the garden or inside the garden. And this is where the can of worms come in. It was been debated as to whether this took place outside the garden, because it says all of the earth. It says humankind was created, male and female, he created them. it gives us a lot of inklings as to they're supposed to take dominion over all of the earth. One of the arguments is that the way the Torah and Hebrew writings are written is that they give you a general explanation, and they go back and then they give you a specific explanation of what's going on. But we're going to see that this is most likely not the case, and we really need to keep an open mind so we can consider what this lesson teaches us. Some of the lessons teach, or some of the rabbis say, that this was outside the garden, this creation of humankind as it is. And I go on to say this could only have occurred outside the garden, and we'll explore this idea further in just a moment. But now we move on to a different scenario that takes place in the garden, specifically in the garden. It says, Bereshit 2, 7 through 9, and then Yahweh Elohim formed the Adam of the dust of the ground and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and the Adam became a living soul. And this is very interesting that it calls it the Adam. In Hebrew, it's Ha-Adam. Okay? So we could say the man, but Ha-Adam is an interesting word. So, and the Adam became a living soul. So he formed this creature from the dust of the ground, and in this case he breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and at this point he became alive. Whereas the humankind that we talked about, he says, let us create humankind in our image, in our likeness, and then he simply created them, male and female, he created them. Much along the same lines as he spoke into creation the animals, he spoke into creation the birds, he spoke into creation the fish. So we might get an idea that there's a difference going on here. Okay? Everybody scandalized? All right, good. It's working. Then it says, and Yahweh Elohim planted a garden eastward in Eden, and there he put the Adam whom he had formed. So what does it say? And then he planted a garden eastward in Eden, and there he put the Adam which he had formed. In chapter 1 it says, he created humankind and told them, you can eat from all the trees on all the earth. Don't dominate the earth. Take responsibility over the earth. But here he's taken the Adam that he's created and placing him in a garden. Okay? Out of the ground made Yahweh Elohim to grow every tree that is pleasant to the sight and good for food. The tree of life, also in the midst of the garden, and the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Now, this is interesting. And keep this in mind, that it says the tree of life also in the midst of the garden. And then it says in the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. When the serpent asked Isha what Elohim had said, did he really say not to eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil? Isha said, no, he said not to eat from the tree that's in the midst of the garden. What tree's in the midst of the garden? The tree of life. Okay? So, we don't pay attention to Torah. We twist Torah. We misinterpret the things that can bring us life into something that is not there. So, Bereshit 2, 15, 17. And Yahweh Elohim took the Adam and put him into the Garden of Eden to dress it and to keep it. There's his responsibility. Humankind through the Adam would learn to tend to the responsibilities given to them by Elohim. At this time there were no things of Elohim and things of humankind. The will of Elohim was the will of humankind. There was no difference between the will of God and the will of man. They were simply one will because they didn't know any different. Everybody with me? They didn't know any different.
Right.
Okay? Then it goes on and says, and Yahweh Elohim commanded the Adam, saying, of every tree of the garden you may freely eat, but Of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil you shall not eat of it, for in the day that you eat of it you shall surely die. 2 commandments. In the garden, Adam is given 2 basic commandments. One positive, to eat freely from all the trees in the garden, which would include the tree of life. And one negative commandment, not to eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Yahweh knew that to acquire this knowledge too quickly would destroy humankind. Humankind was to slowly and carefully be fed from this tree by Elohim, so that humankind could learn and digest knowledge without bringing upon itself the destruction that too much knowledge too fast brings. And this idea is supported by a lot of rabbis, that Elohim was going to spoon feed the Adam from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, and along the way tutor the Adam, teach the Adam the difference, so that as Adam matured, he would be able to take over a role as the leader outside the garden and lead humankind according to the things of Elohim, and teach according to the things of Elohim. This is basically the beginning of what we would consider the priesthood of Melchizedek, that they would be obedient out of faith because they wanted to maintain this relationship with Elohim. And remember, the humankind outside the garden is innocent. They don't know any better than the animals know. All right? Bereshit 2:18, 21 through 23, or 2:18 and then 21 through 23. That was kind of a weird scripture, huh? Okay. Yahweh Elohim said, "It is not good that the man should be alone. I will make a helpmeet for him." Everybody says, oh, well, he had to make a mate for the Adam because it wasn't good for him to be alone. We need to make a woman for him. And we talked about this last year in our study of Woman, the Light of Shabbat. And I think there's some of those copies floating around somewhere. But Elohim here recognizes that the Adam must be able to grow spiritually and will need a means to come to him. Elohim knows that transgression is going to take place and that the Adam must be able to seek him in worship as well as to be able to grow spiritually. And we'll see what all that means in these next few verses. And Yahweh Elohim caused a deep sleep to fall upon the Adam, and he slept, and he took one of his ribs and closed up the place of the flesh that was there instead thereof, if you get into the archaic medieval language. And the rib which Yahweh Elohim had taken from the Adam made he a woman, Isha, and brought her to the Adam. And the Adam said, "This is now bone of my bones and flesh of my flesh. She shall be called Isha, woman, because she was taken out of Ish, man." This tells us a huge something about our means of communicating to Elohim. Okay? Adam was a single being, but divided into 2 particular beings, one Ish and Isha. We see that from a physical point of view, but from a relationship point of view, separated into Ish, which is the male. As men, we are very mechanical. Hands-on is what we do. We try to fix things. Whereas a woman has insight, and we have to say this, guys, it's true. A woman has insight that a man does not have. She can see things from a point of view that we would otherwise miss. Okay? She shall be called Isha because she came from Ish. That humankind was now able to worship, to pray, to study, and to praise in order that the spirit of humankind could connect to Elohim in an intimate way. We say that from Ish comes Isha. From our prayer, from our study, from our praise, our spirit comes forth. Okay? Everybody with me? Now, this will open a can of worms. We've already opened it, but The humankind waiting for this perfect Adam to come and teach them was strictly physical and waited outside